Hi everyone, welcome to the Athletic Skills Podcast, and today I've got Blaine Clancy on with me. So Blaine is a physical performance coach, and today we're going to touch around youth athletic development, a bit around parents and developing movement, and then we're going to provide a bit of advice in terms of developing young practitioners developing as well, and he's going to provide a bit of advice in terms of his journey and what people can go through. So Blaine, thank you very much for joining.
No problem at all. Thank you for having me on. Good to chat.
Yeah, it's good to chat. And I know we've had a lot of back and forth online, so it's nice to chat in person as well.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
So Blaine, I know one of the big topics that you're passionate around, and we've both had a lot of work in is around youth athletic development, and it's a big area. I know it's been growing over time. So has your philosophy on youth athletic development changed as you've grown as a coach, or have you had one main philosophy and you've done that throughout?
I think it has changed as I've changed as a coach. I started out when I was younger, more youngster academy where I was fresh in and didn't really know. We never know what we're doing along them stages. I kept it simple, which was perfect. Just fundamental movements. Through the ECB, we had a starting strength or a foundational strength where it was your squats, your lunges, your push, your pulls. And I quite liked that. It seemed to work well with those academy athletes that were there at the time, getting the foundations. And then as you learn a bit more, and I think as the more learning things came out and more talk of specificity and transfer, I've almost blended into more of a change it up, trying to change it too much, where I tried to be too specific. I wanted to put that exercise in because, an example of mimic bowling or it mimic batting, and possibly reflecting on this, I was almost trying to get too specific with that stuff, even with the academy, when a simple pull-off press, as an example, might have been better than trying to do an overloaded bat swing. Then again, coming out the other side of that, more where I'm at now, where I don't work per se with junior athletes in an organizational environment, more personal, it's gone back again to the fundamentals where I see more bang for buck in developing those younger athletes now with the simple movement patterns, which comes with its challenges when you're working with coaches and obviously communicating with the parents. When they look at you doing squat technique and they're like, how is this transferring across to anything my child wants to do? But simply, it's gone from the fundamentals to possibly becoming too confused in my own programming with strong body motor learning stuff back into the foundational movements. So I guess that's the journey of my philosophy on youth athletic development.
So why are these fundamental moves at the forefront of your coaching? So you see a lot of sports coaches real focusing on the sport-specific movements and skills. So why are these foundation movements important for that athlete to maybe develop?
Possibly an example might be useful here, and based on work I've been doing with some junior tennis athletes. They've moved, accelerated to run towards the ball to play the shot. They got to decelerate, control their core to play the shot back. Now, that's basic strength training. Fundamentally, these young athletes, they need to be able to accelerate. They need to be able to decelerate. They need to be able to control their body through the trunk to play that shot back, in simple terms. Now, if I want to have some overloaded medicine ball throw off one foot, I don't think that's where my athletes need right now, maybe in 5 years' time. But if I scale that right back to, okay, let's do a squat, a hinge, a split squat, let's look at some rotation, anti-rotation, anti-extension movements. Building that base for me will transfer for them into that tennis court movement first and foremost. So it's building that foundation from which to perform the movements rather than training the movement itself in the sport.
And as you've grown as a coach over time and you've worked in different sports, is that why you've started to move a bit more in terms of global movements rather than you mentioned in your early in your career when you maybe look to moves maybe sport specific, or that can relate to batting, or that can relate to fast bowling? But now you're looking at more global sort of movements that can apply across different sports.
I think you become this experience, right? And you also become more comfortable in writing basic training programs. Basic works, but as a young coach, you're trying to sell yourself to the athlete. Look, we're going to do this movement because it's bowling specific or it's forearm smash specific. It's going to help you. Whereas in now, I'm more comfortable in myself as a coach where I can actually sell that to the younger athlete and say, look, I know this movement isn't what you're actually going to do on court, but this is why we're doing it, and this is how it's going to transfer for you on court. So I guess that has evolved based on my own confidence and being able to sell what I'm running in a program and to be comfortable actually doing that, because Instagram doesn't want to see my squat with my junior tennis athlete, do they? They want to see some fancy footwork drill, but I'm not worried about that anymore. Just train the athlete for what they actually need and sell that to them.
So is there such thing as sport specific, would you say, in terms of exercise selection or S&C? Is there such thing as sport specific?
I think it's the big can of worms that where there's a huge spectrum. Let's just say a squat's on one side of it. Right on the other side of that is actually what the coach does with them on the field. And we can work anywhere along that. At the very top end of it, we can work on field with the coach doing some actual specific strength and conditioning for specific movements. So that can be very specific. And another example from a field sport, it might be with the equipment in hand, working a cutting drill with two defenders coming in to evade them. That's really specific for what they might do on the field. But on the other end is the squat or the lateral lunge that will build the strength for that cutting action in the training area.
And what's your thought process in terms of maybe a coach who comes to you and says, or a parent might come to you and say, I want this child to improve their batting, so they need to get stronger, need to be more power, or I've got my tennis player who needs to have a better forehand or a more powerful serve, for example. So what's your thoughts behind developing those areas for that youth athlete and then getting their buy-in in terms of your training plan?
Say it's all sales, isn't it? At the end of the day, we're all trying to sell what we do. And with parents, that's no different because they want the sport specific stuff as well. That's what they're training. But it's just conversations. Like I explain to them, I'm like, look, these are the movements. What do you think? And I think what do you think is a big question because they like giving their input. But I always break it down to, look, if we do this, then we do this, then we do this, in a longer term process, the result's gonna be this. And I think still the longer term approach is the key there, rather than expecting that 6 kind of week window. And I always say as well that, look, if I went on court with your kid right now, would I be able to perform that better? And they're like, yeah, probably. And I say, why is that? And they're like, oh, you're bigger and stronger. I'm like, yes, it's strength at the end of the day that has a big crossover to that from my arena. So that's how I try to sell that with them and say, look, let's build the strength and then we can move into it.
And like you mentioned, I think a lot of it is around a two-way process, especially working with an athlete, I found, in terms of getting their input. Because ultimately it's their career and their performance and they're on the pitch and they know their body best, I'd say, as they get older. So yeah, getting their buy-in by getting their input as well will add big value because you could give them the best program possible, but if they don't buy into that, then that program always becomes useless, really, doesn't it?
I think also is that I like to ask my athletes, so what do your coaches think? So whereabouts in your game at the minute do your coaches think you can work on? And they'll say X, Y, Z movement, and I'll say, oh, so what does coach think? Do we work on strength, speed, endurance? I'm like, oh, coach think you work on this, and whether I agree with that or not, I'm generating the conversation where I'm listening. I'm listening to what the coaches said. I'm listening to what the athletes said, and then I put the program based on that. So getting that kind of well-rounded buy-ins from them that way, I'm listening to them, and then I provide the programs from there.
Yeah, it's then walking them through in terms of relating it back to performance on the pitch, even if it is a global foundation movement, you're still relating it in some way to them that they'll understand, rather than going into finite details of the S&C principles, really.
I think that relatable element is, I know as coaches we want repeat custom because that's our business at the end of the day. But for me, I can make myself redundant in 6 months, and the athlete is self-sufficient and they know why they're doing this, how to do that. So for me, it's always an education as well. When my younger athletes, when they're 10, 11, 12, I try to tell them, like, look, we're doing this exercise for this reason. We need this technique with this tempo for this many reps for this reason. So I'm getting more buy-in and accountability from them as well to involve in the process is ultimately a big seller as well.
And what are the key, you mentioned around the global foundation movements that are a big pillar for you in terms of the youth athlete development? So what are those movements? Do you have a specific movements that you focus on at the start? Is that all within a gym setting, or do you look at the field as well? So yeah, where do you start in terms of these movements?
In big kind of yes, if we look at the general weight room, such first of all, it's push, pull, lunge, squat, hinge. Let's get a lateral lunge or a step up in there as well. With one vertical push, horizontal push. It depends how much time we have, obviously, but looking along those core training, anti-extension, anti-rotation as fundamentals, rotation, little bits like that. So there's another core program as well, but also looking into warm-ups and even the stuff for them to do before they go on court. Not to do in their own time at home, where it is the hop and sticks, it is double leg jump and landings, it is single leg lateral jump and landings, building in that plyometric base as such, where they can springboard from that into more pogos and plyometrics. So in a nutshell, it's those basic movements in the gym where it's squat, lunge, hip, hinge, brace, throw, and out of the gym, even in my warm time, it is the jumping and landing fundamentals. So a good jump and landing fundamental and a good solid movement and strength base. And I think that's setting them up for some good training when they get older.
And would you say play sort of fits within that? Is because those movements you see a lot of times the coaches that can be very structured in terms of you have to do 3x10, 3x12 and so on. So where does that sort of unstructured creativeness, like the play element, come into that sort of program when you're developing these movements?
Warm-ups. So warm-ups from the jumping and landing point of view, we can put out like the hopscotches and we can put out some hurdles and bits and pieces like that where I can actually have a game set up with them. So we're still picking off to the jumping and landings in warm-ups with a bit of fun. And over time, I can suggest to them, look, what warm-up do you want to do today? I want to see these 3 things. You create that. Again, more accountability into it. And I guess with the gym stuff, I like to have a bit of flexibility with it. So I will say, look, we're going to do a split squat type action today. What would you rather do? Would you rather do a split squat, a lateral lunge, that kind of thing? And I say, well, what do you want to do the core? So I guess I give options. I let them struck within reason because we still got to get the adaptation of the session. Within reason, I allow some flexibility in the program so they think they're being accountable. And that goes for within reason sets of reps as well. I'm like, oh, how do you feel in today? I want to do this. As long as it's within the confinements of what I want them to achieve, I'll let them be flexible with it. And to be honest, it might sound like wishy-washy there, but I've had some good results with that. And that has worked for me.
And then again, that gets their buy in terms of the adaptability to that individual. An individual might be different to the person next to them in terms of how their body's feeling or how they're moving. So it's understanding that individual is key to get their buy-in as well.
Absolutely, and their sport and what kind of athlete they are in their sport. And they need to do my assessment on given day. I'll just tell them it is as well. We technically control at the end of the day. But it does allow for that accountability and the buy-in, really.
Yeah, especially with those younger ones, because you want to develop a fun element to fitness and physical development, because they might not play sport for life, but if you can give them that positive relationship in terms of their strength and conditioning or athletic development, then they're going to keep that going. Hopefully after they've finished maybe in the academy setting or they're just training towards general life.
I think what you said there is exactly how my role at the university is. I've got 18 to 21-year-olds. And a lot of those athletes, you just want to play sport for fun. They don't want to come to S&C at 7 a.m. But I see that as a valuable time where they might not play sport after uni. But if they can go away with going, right, okay, I know if I go to the gym 3 times a week, I can a squat, a bench press, a pull-up, and a plank on day 1. Day 2, I can do this, and day 3, I can do this. And they can do that after uni throughout their working life. And I think I've done a good service there in terms of that education process.
And is there a difference there in terms of your programming and your coaching when you're training towards maybe health or general and then towards performance? Is there much of a difference there, or is there a lot of crossover?
A lot of crossover. Strengths are foundational for health and longevity, right? The stronger you are as you age, the more beneficial that will be. I guess from those age groups or from health to performance, it's just the sets of reps and numbers. I'm not going to, if I've got a 19-year-old athlete in the uni who is national level and who has 10 years training experience, I might push them at times of the year into a heavy 2-rep max. But if somebody is been training for 2 years and might just want to be healthy for the rest of their life, I'm not going to push them into a 2-rep max. They might stay in areas around 3 sets to 5 to 6 to keep it safe, but still building the strength. I guess it depends on the athlete and the training history.
So I just want to go back to your coaching movements and when you work with those younger athletes. Is there a thought process going through your mind when you're analysing a movement as a whole in terms of whether you might progress or regress that athlete? Because I was having a chat with another coach in terms of what sort of the thought process you go around and when do you actually start to push an athlete or when do you start to regress an athlete, because you don't want to make it too easy for them or too hard for them. So is there anything that you got specific when you're looking at a certain movement in terms of whether to push an athlete on or regress them back a little bit?
Yeah, and just never too fast for me. If we're looking at those age groups, just never too fast. I'm a believer in if you do an exercise 1 week with a certain weight, there's no harm in doing it the week after to consolidate that because we know at those age groups as well that 1 week they might be strong, the next week they might be more fatigued, they might be tired, and the next week after they might be even more tired, so they might go backwards to go forwards again. Definitely every session's an assessment to say, look, are we going to progress this now or not? But I'm never ever too quick to do that. It is a kind of a case by case process, but I'm also not scared to throw weight on for some of the younger ones as well if they're ready for it. But most of those progressions generally will be weight, then they'll just be movement. So it might be going from a split squat to a lunge, but I sometimes might done a nice split squat for 3 weeks, saying, okay, I want to progress this to lunge at some point. I might put that in the warm up a few weeks before to see how they look under a body weight lunge first and foremost. Integrate movements through a more warm up process, and then provide them with the overload and change that exercise there and then.
And is that the same in terms of, let's say, plyometrics or speed development in terms of when you're analyzing them? Because those movements are performed at a bit quicker speed. So do you take them into isolation when they're doing it in a chaotic environment, or do you give them a different cue? Or so how do you start to progress or regress those movements that may be happening a bit more quickly?
I would change the environment first and foremost on that. I wouldn't want to change the intensity of that output first. I would always change the environment. So if I think somebody's looking good on a pogo, I might put a hurdle out just to change the stimulus to see how their body and brain reacts to it, depending on that specific age. But definitely changing the environment. So I might, or the organism, I might do a role a skip or doing some running drills, and it's nice. I might just want to challenge the core more and get them to put their hands overhead, for an example. So that's challenging that a little more. It's squeezing the toothpaste out analogy where I'm changing one thing at a time. I might then, that looks okay overhead. Let's try and challenge that a little bit quicker again, but nothing too quick. Then let's try some perturbation on that. But I guess those ones that are more complex and more velocity based or are a higher output, I would definitely try and just change one little thing at a time to see if that would have an impact. Firstly, by changing the movement rather than upping the intensity that can come after for me.
And you mentioned, I think, towards the start around accel, decel is quite key movements in a lot of different sports. And I'm sure you're working in across a few different sports as well. And that could be quite hard action for a young child or a young athlete to learn, especially when there's defenders or there's a ball in play as well. So understanding how to move in those environments. How would you start to maybe move from a chaotic environment to more of an isolated environment in terms of those sort of movements? If a sports coach was maybe listening to this and let's say they're doing a small-sided game and the athlete was maybe struggling to accel, decel within that environment, what sort of thoughts would you go around in terms of helping that athlete?
Just taking it back to basic and even watching that. It's always good to be in the sideline, right, or hearing that from the coach's mouth first and foremost and trying to understand where that's actually breaking down. We don't always have that luxury of being able to watch them on the sideline. So I would go back to basics, looking at that optional, what's the acceleration movement like? How are they accelerating? Are they too upright? Are they not projecting horizontally? Are they coming up too soon? Simple stuff like that to try and get to the bottom of that. And deceleration is usually the one where the coaches will have more of a thought on, because I think at that age, some of them can't decelerate because they're not strong enough, so they can't go in quick enough. But it is bringing it back to try and figure out why is that actually happening. I do these in warm-ups anyway to try and look at my athletes. So I'm going to camp tomorrow, and my warm-ups will be, let's look at all their acceleration mechanics and the deceleration mechanics in the warm-up. And I can try and then work with coach to say, look, I think this person's going to have a problem. Can we change this drill to this? But if the coach came to me, I'd take it back to basics and say, look, what's going on? And if it looks good in isolation, I might challenge that a bit more to try and actually find where the problem is before I can try and provide the solution.
And then these probably don't appreciate that these young athletes can actually learn quite quickly if you put them in the right environment, or if you provide them a problem, and they might find the solution that works for them quite quickly. If you can provide them maybe a cue or a constraint, they might be able to find that movement quite quickly. You then can put them back into that chaotic environment again.
I think it's quite interesting because it is not spectrum. I've actually seen 3 months ago at one of the first camps I did, a coach set up a cutting drill and left the athlete to their own devices to decide which way to cut first and foremost. I was watching it. It was awful. There was no intent, no intensity. So I actually stood in there. So putting a bit of chaos in there actually made the intensity go sky high. So I think sometimes we don't need to regress right back to the basics because it can lose the intensity. So that was nice to see that actually when I put some chaos in
Mm.
there, the drill was executed with a much higher intent, and that was as simple as right. You're going to cut off that first defender, but when you cut past that first defender, I'm going to be standing there. So you got to get back as quick as possible, and that changed the drill instantly just because simply don't hit me. So they were focusing on not hitting me rather than the actual drill itself, and the execution wasn't perfect, but it did go through the wrist from there.
Yeah, and their body will self-organize.
Mm.
Whereas if they're overthinking things and they've got a lot of cues in their mind, then that may where the movement starts to break down, especially when they're doing it slower, when it should be done at a little bit quicker pace. So yeah, that's a good point in terms of keeping that intensity high, but maybe start to add a few constraints to push them in that different directions.
I don't overthink it. Those young athletes, their minds are going all the time, aren't they? And
Mm.
sometimes they do over, sometimes they don't listen. So just getting a constraint in there, or this grip particularly, it just changed that drill. And it's something I'm working with the coaches for next time to say, look, let's get not a, we don't need fancy drills. Let's just get a simple constraint in there and work from there to see how that goes.
And you mentioned earlier around a big stakeholder in a youth athlete's development is their parents. So how do you start to work as a S&C coach or as a coach as a whole in terms of working with the parents to get the best out of that young athlete physically?
I guess the younger athletes and parents I'm working with, it is the parent that's the communicator who's first reached out to me. So I'm basically doing consultations with the parents first and foremost. And those initial conversations, in my opinion, play a huge part. I don't just sit there and say, okay, I'll do for little Timmy what you want, exactly what you want. We're going to be doing 180 change of directions all the time because that's the sole thing. For me, that goes back to the salesmanship on that, where I actually sit and talk to a parent and say, look, this is the whole breakdown. This is the end goal. This is where I think your child will be in 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, but we will get there. But for now, in this first 4 weeks of the program, this is exactly what I'm going to do with them when I have them, what I want you to do with them at home. I hold them accountable as well to do this at home. And for me, that's been quite useful. And I think when the parents are there with them in the session, as well as speaking to the athlete, I actually engage the parent in that. I'm like, what do you think? How does this look? What can you see here? I think the big winner in all those for the parents is after 3 weeks and they're starting to see that their kid is actually moving better on court or on field, and the coaches are giving that feedback as well. And that's the buy-in winner. So I guess it's trying to get the parent to buy in for the first 4 weeks because after that's where it goes. I think as well, it's what I've learned is not to be too soft with the parents as well, because I think a lot of coaches in our position can be just take that from the parent and, oh, this is business. I want the parents' money. I'm going to agree with them. But for me, just go back at them with, you got to back yourself with your knowledge. Tell the parent, look, this is how it's going to go. This maybe not that direct, but you got to sell it to them that way, where I'm the expert and I'm going to coach them in this way for the next 6 months. It's not going to be a 4 week program. If you don't like that, find somewhere else. But having the confidence in your own program to be able to get the parents on side as well.
And I like that how you involve them in the process, so you get them actually observe the sessions. A lot of the time, the parent might pick the child up at the end of the session, and the first thing they'll ask is, what did you do in today's session? The child might not give the full concept of what you've actually done in the sessions. Whereas if you actually involve them in the session, they can see it themselves in terms of, and then you can start to educate them there in terms of what you're actually doing, and ultimately they'll see them more than you will, how they then pass on that message to the child and get that buy-in into it as well.
I don't do isolated sessions. I tell the parents, look, this is a weekly process. Every 5 minute warm up before you lose a sport, don't they? So every 5 to 10 minute warm up, that's an opportunity for the child to get better. So me involving the parent in the sessions, they will go away and supervise the child in the warm up. So I'm getting drip feeds of training throughout the week that the parent can coach them because I have educated the parent enough on that. So they're getting more bang for the buck and better for the child overall. So that's why it's a must for me.
And then it's a similar message in terms of around nutrition and that sort of side as well, when they're maybe wanting to prepare them before the session or after the session as well, or around the sport they might be playing, and because they have a big role to play in terms of that side as well.
Yeah, it's that whole load management thing, isn't it? It's especially those kids, they get absolutely battered by all the sports. So say that nutrition, the hydration, the recovery, the stretching, all of that goes into it. Sometimes we might be doing things that are a little bit token, like a 30-second stretch after training, but that builds the habit of the global recovery. Sure, that is almost as important for these kids because they see me once a week for an hour, but they're on court or playing for 20 hours a week for them. So that has a massive impact.
And what's your thoughts then in terms of young athletes doing multi-sports in terms of their development overall? Is it a positive thing? Is there detriments to the actual development? So yeah, where do you sit in that multi-sport participation?
Yeah, I'm for it. As long as they're not doing 15 sports and exercising for 30 hours a week and breaking down. So we'll always have that athlete health at the top of that pile. But as we just spoke about with some of these drills and chaos in the environment and we're trying to perceive and move at the same time, I think playing different sports to get all of that movement skill in their library is really important. And I know specialization is a big thing and it's happening younger and younger, but they can always play 2 or 3 sports right up until a stage where they make that decision. So for me, in terms of building movement, building perception, building everything that's going to be fundamental to improve your sport that's not their sport, it's very key. So I'd be for the multi-sport.
And I was quite a big fan actually in my coaching within the sport. You still introduce multi-sports around that, whether that's through the warm-up. We do maybe touch rugby before we go into cricket, for example, or we did netball before you go into B or something like that, where you're still introducing multi-sports within your session as well. And I think that has big value, especially within crickets. In the cricket setting, I did a lot of gymnastics for mobility and for learning to be on the floor and roll. So that was quite a good, and then it gets good buy-in in terms of the athletes as well, because it's good fun, something different, especially if you're doing that sport a few times a week. It just changes things up a bit.
Definitely. Right. Some sport games, like I remember when I did some work with netballers, we were playing handball, bits and pieces like this before, and they loved it. The intensity was going up. We're looking at different types of not they weren't jumping and landing like they were in netball, but different types of movement, dodging, still evading the defender and defense trying to stay on top of that. So technically, it was an agility session with decent intensity because they wanted to win. So you can't negate those kind of things if they're fit into the plan properly.
Yeah, I completely agree. And so just to wrap up this kind of youth development sort of topic, if you got any key advice for any young sports coach who may be working with a 13-year-old or a developing 12, 13, 14-year-old, you got any advice in terms of where to start in terms of dripping some S&C into their coaching?
Yeah, I'd suggest keeping it simple. And one big thing is coach the athlete. Don't coach whatever program you've seen online that is suggesting athletic development. And just stick to the fundamentals, nail those over time, and you can't really go wrong from there. And coach the athlete first and foremost. Whatever they need, we give them from an early age.
And then that relates back to the theme that was spoke around in terms of understanding that individual as well. And not thinking every 13-year-old is the same as another 13-year-old. And not one topic spoke around today is maturation, which should be a big thing as well. So we'll be chatting for another couple of hours if we spoke around that.
I'm ready.
So just to finish off on another topic I know you're quite passionate around is in terms of a developing practitioner, not just S&C, but across a lot of anyone that's wanting to work in high performance, in terms of how that person gets their foot in the door from university, to stepping out of university, they want to get a role in high performance. So a common theme is around volunteering, and there's quite a big debate around volunteering for free or free work. Should that person be working for free, or should they go on a paid role? So what's your thoughts in terms of if someone that's looking to work in high performance, and I'm sure you've done it yourself in your own development and you've had interns or volunteers working with yourself. So yeah, what's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I guess it's really interesting one in our profession where back back in my day, it makes me sound old, but I remember still intern year, I had part-time jobs and I was doing about 30 hours of work for free. At the time, it was nasty. I reflect, but I want to do it again, probably not. However, the demand versus the supply of jobs in this country, it's insane. If you're not doing something to set yourself apart and to learn, you're not going to get where you need to be unless you're very lucky. And would I be where I'm at right now without that? Not. So I'm biased that way where I'm like volunteering, absolutely. On the other side of the fence, the last 3, 4 years at the university, we've been having interns. There's been a debate where I guess I advertised for some of these online as well, and internet was going wild and oh, it's free labor. What are you doing? Blah 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 blah. And it really got me thinking about it. That yes, I had some students volunteering for me. They were volunteering for 15 hours a week, but you got to reflect on what they're getting for that, the experience they're getting for that. Not just for me. I like to throw my interns into the deep end and go, look, just go for it. And as long as you stick with these confinements, go and learn. So they were getting hands-on coaching experience for about 10 hours a week. Then in the other 5 hours a week, they were learning personally from me. They were getting my mentorship. They were getting all my resources. I was helping them dealing with the programming. And if you wrap that all up into something that I could package and sell, that will be a lot of money over the course of a year. So for me, that's not them coming and working for free. They're actually getting a lot return in value there. And so that's how I see that. And I know that the economy's not the best right now, and it's harder for people to live in. But that doesn't mean we can't volunteer for 3 or 4 hours a week, at least. I just feel that, I don't know, going full circle now, where that many people are complaining about the voluntary stuff, that it almost is nobody wants to advertise it anymore and people won't do it. But for me, if you don't do it, how are you going to get that experience? And that sucks to say, but that's just the reality and the fact, right? If you don't do it, you're not going to get ahead in this industry. But people should be working 40 hours a week. Bloody else, you can't volunteer for 4, 5, 6 hours a week. Then what chance have you got in a job that's going to require you to work bloody hard for 50 hours a week anyway?
Yeah, and I completely agree in terms of the non-monetary value that people can get. How much would it be to be mentored off a high performance expert? People are more than happy to put them money towards courses and education and all these CPD stuff, whereas you getting for free, you're getting hands-on experience with someone watching you over and giving you daily mentoring and feedback there. So I think that the amount of value you might pay as a young coach to get that mentoring off a high performance expert, you would paying quite a lot of money, wouldn't you, if you wanted just some mentoring, whereas a volunteering position, you're getting that for free.
I guess we see both sides of it, because there's probably a lot of shitty things out there where people in the past, they might just be a cone picker upper or filling protein shakes and whatnot. So I guess it is the value returned on people's time for free within reason. So I'm for it. Just go get it done. It's gonna get you places. It's gonna open doors. It's gonna create connections. If you're not trying for that, and I look at this in some of my own journey now, trying to create my own personal business. For like, notice paying me to do the above end hours to do that, are they? You know what I mean? It might eventually work out for me in the end with all the time I'm invested now. And even my gym business that I've got at the minute, I've invested about 400, 500 hours in the last year of that, of my own time, without any financial return, trying to get this business off the ground. But if I didn't want to do that, where would, you know what I mean? Where would it be? I think some things within reason, you've got to give these things time, and the time investment will be worth it in the long run.
Yeah, it's probably up to that student or that young practitioner in terms of finding out what that volunteering position will be about, rather than just thinking it's the name on the shirt or badge on the badge of whatever the place they're working at. It's understanding what value they'll be getting from it, and whether that's opportunity to learn to program and plan, to be front of coaching a group, or for example, so it's understanding what value they'll get from that experience as well, rather than just going and volunteering and not getting anything out of it, because then no one really wins from that position.
Yeah, and I guess it's hard for those young coaches to know that, though. So I think that's where us, as the more experienced practitioners and guys based in football and rugby clubs and stuff like that, they have to take some responsibility, not just to manipulate a pair of hands for them to succeed. You actually have to take the value and try and grow the next generation of this, and not to abuse them as such for that time. So I guess it's a bit of a two-way process there.
And I think there needs to be a place where that young practitioner needs to learn those softer skills that might not have got through the degree, for example, communicating and with different stakeholders, whether that was another coach, their actual athletes, and also how to network as well, which is a big one in terms of finding those opportunities, rather than, I'm sure you've had it as well in the past, where people maybe message you on LinkedIn, or they maybe send you an email and just straight away ask for a job. So it's how you actually go about getting those opportunities is a big part as well.
I just reflect on kind of my first venture into elite sports, and none of the stuff I learned in university prepared me from that day to day. I was working with athletes who've just always been athletes, working with coaches who've just always worked in that sport and didn't know any other way. So that kind of soft skills is huge in that in sitting in the library, learning stuff about heart physiology doesn't prepare you for those kind of things. So those are quite huge. I know some degree programs now are actually changing to try and help us facilitate that, which is great, but nothing beats the going out into the world yourself and dropping cold emails and trying to speak to coaches. And there will be some people that pick them up. So if there's any younger students listening to this, just reach out, man.
Yeah, I completely agree. So on that topic, if anyone did want to reach out to yourself, is there any way people can get in touch with you, maybe on anything on the youth development that we spoke around, or other stuff you're doing at the moment, or any of the advice you mentioned around getting into elite sport?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to take some communication, whether it's through my email, which I'll give to you. You might want to bash out, or my Instagram, BC_performance. BC performance wasn't available. But yeah, I'm more than happy to chat to anybody on these things because, yeah, I'm answering questions, I'm learning as well. So I'll take as many questions as I can.
Yeah, I'll put those in the show notes for people that want to get in touch. But Blaine, thank you very much for chatting. There's a lot of great stuff there in terms of the youth development and also the getting to elite sport. And there's definitely see you're quite passionate around those areas. So it'd be good to see how you get on, and people will reach out if they want to chat to more. So yeah, Blaine, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Isaac. Soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Athletic Skills Podcast. I hope you enjoyed our discussion and found it helpful in learning more about impacting your youth athletes' movement and physical development. If you did enjoy this episode, please take a moment to give us a subscribe and share to any other coaches or teachers that you think it may help. Also, if you have any feedback or topics that you'd like us to cover in future episodes, please feel free to reach out to us on social media or on the email in the description. And we'll be more than happy to try and tackle those challenges you are facing as a sports coach or a PE teacher. Thank you very much, guys, for listening. I look forward to speaking to you soon.